Oh, do you? Okay.
All right, folks, we're going to go ahead and get started with session 2. So if I could have your attention, I hope the break was good. You got an opportunity to stretch your legs, refill your coffee. Our next session is going to be on a conversation and an issue that I think we all have to face, that we all have to overcome, and that is making the case for information management at your organization. And so we've got Nikki Lodico, Bonnie Sauer, and Lori Eaton, two of the three of the most wonderful practitioners and experts at exactly this, making the case for information management at your organization.
Hello, everyone. We're really excited to be here with you this morning, although this whole FEMA thing happening in 20 minutes does have me a little on edge, but we're going to be all right. So we'll get to our introductions. You'll be able to, well, first we'll talk about, we have a plan for today, although I should have the FEMA thing in there. So we'll do introductions, we'll talk a little bit about our goals, which are based around 3 big questions that we'll be asking, and then we'll open up for questions and answers to all of you, because we want to hear from you as well. So, we can go. Yep, there we are. Hi. We can match the faces to the names now. This is us, but instead of going through our academic and career histories, we thought you might get to know us a little bit better if you know why we're in information management, what we enjoy about it. So I'll turn it over to Nikki. Tell me about a joyful moment in information management.
This is where we nerd out on all of you. Something that brings me joy, and that has always brought me joy in this field, is the simplicity and utility of a good spreadsheet. And several years ago, a colleague of mine raised the bar for spreadsheets when she created something that wasn't just useful and effective, but it was gorgeous to look at, and it told a visual story. Truly, and helped me appreciate the beauty of information at a whole new level.
I can raise your geek to the nerdy level with my story. I'm Lori Eaton. I'm a certified archivist, and I've been working with foundations for about 5 or 6 years. So my geeky moment was I reviewed a folder of grant-related information that were so beautifully named I felt heard. So I talk about file naming with a lot of my foundations. And in the same way that physical archives need to be preserved in acid-free folders and boxes, a first step to preserving digital files is solid file names. That was my magic moment.
Excellent. I mean, if this is resonating, you know you're in the right spot. You found your people. So for me, it's been when people bring, somebody starting a project or a group, and they have their project charter, and they come to me and say, okay, we're going to start. How do we set up our files so that we can just turn it over at the end? What do we need to do? That brings me a lot of joy, because that same thing, I feel so heard. It's like, you get it. It's not an end of the process. It's right there at the beginning. Great. So let's talk about our goals for today. Great. So we have three big questions around 3 big goals that we have, and what we want to do is first to talk about why this matters, right? We're going to pull back. We've heard some of it already in the earlier panels and what people have been saying, but we're going to talk about it, from like an organizational perspective of why this matters. And then we'll be talking about, like, stuff's already happening, right? Your organization is already doing things that are in the information management landscape. So what is that, and how do we bring that all together into a cohesive program? And then, from wherever you are, how do you get to the next level? What's next after that? Where do you go once you know what's going on, and how do you move forward? So with that, we'll go to the next slide. Oh, first, let's pull back. Before we move forward, let's pull back so we know what we're all talking about, put a little context around this. So what is information management? Let's just start with that. As a panel, we looked at the ARMA International definition, and we found it a little less than satisfying, because it starts out by saying information management is I know this is going to be like crazy. Managing information. And nobody saw that coming. So, like, all right, that has to be a little better. I mean, and I see this since I've gotten into this field. You're talking to someone and they say, "What do you do?" And I say, "I'm an information manager." And they just like, okay, you see the math happening. Like, that means she manages information. But what does that mean? So I tend to talk about information as a workspace in the same way that a kitchen is a workspace. You set up your kitchen in your household for what you're going to do. If you're going to be baking a lot, it looks different than if you're cooking a lot, or if you're doing takeout a lot. Those are totally different setups of your kitchen. So, once it's all set up, you know what you're doing in there, then you have certain things that are available, right? So you have this like consistency of what's going on, so that when you need a utensil, you grab it. When you're planning a meal, you know what staples will be available in the kitchen. Or, hey, safety, you need an oven mitt, you know exactly where to find it. But, and then if everybody's doing that, if anybody starts doing their own thing in the kitchen, then the kitchen starts not being a functional workspace anymore. That starts to degrade. So there's also thinking about how to protect things that are in the kitchen, right? So somebody comes home with the ice cream, puts it in the cupboard and not the freezer. You're not gonna have ice cream when you want ice cream, and that'll make a bad day worse, so don't do that. And then worse, you're gonna have a mess to clean up at the end. So, I don't know, has anybody else seen a file folder that kind of feels as usable as melted ice cream? You're looking for information, you can't find it. So that's all right, so now it's coming there. Information management does that for what you do in the kitchen is what you're doing with information management. It creates and fosters consistency of where we store and find information so that it's there for you when you need it. This is helpful for disposition, right? You can confidently destroy records when you need to, or turn them over to the archives. And you can also, do your work as you go about your day. I think the tricky part of the definition is where they talk about while obtaining business value of it, that we manage information while obtaining business value. Because, just like your kitchen, there's things that go in that have an expiration date, right? You know when a grant file closes. You know you're not going to need phone bills from 1985 or the bank statements from the same year. That stuff, you can confidently get rid of that. But then there's that gray area stuff where it's like, well, maybe I need a melon baller. I don't know. And, so you kind of have to work through that. And I think we'll talk about some of that here today. So we'll go to my big question. Should we invest in IM, and what happens if we don't? Well, it's a panel of 3 information management specialists, so yes, you should invest. So rather than talking about whether or not to, we're going to talk about the why and the how. And, all right, I had to rein myself in here and just keep it to 5 reasons why, because it's endless to me, why to invest in information management. I personally got into this. I started out as an archivist, but then working in living organizations, I realized, I'm never going to have a good archive if there's not good information management in the organization. So, but that pitch doesn't work for everyone. Not everybody cares about the archives. I know, shocking. But so talking in an organization about what matters to them. So I have just 5 reasons why you should invest in information management that are more broad across the organization, will have more pull with the people who are allocating resources. So the first has already been talked a little bit about, thanks Andrew, and Lillian really illustrated business continuity. I think you go back 2019, I think that when we thought about business continuity, we thought about disasters, right? So we were kind of had a reactive plan to a disaster. But disasters don't happen to us, they happen to other people. So it wasn't really something that we would proactively progress our information management plans because, it's a really small chance that we're going to need it. But I think the pandemic taught us that we really need to be proactive in how we think we're managing our information, because the people who took a little bit longer, were ones who hadn't thought about the digital transformation and had a bigger leap to do. But as Lillian talked about, there's different people at the table over time, right? So people are going to leave us. They're going to leave to go to another organization. They're going to change roles in our organization. So we have to plan for making sure that we can still continue the work. And the employee experience. From the second that somebody joins your organization, their access to information affects their experience, right? So it's not only whether or not they be successful in their role, but also can they be a good employee of your organization? Do they know what's expected of them? Again, Lillian validated me. It's that employee handbook. Where is it? Can they get to it? Is it something that they can rely on? Support decision-making. I love when this happens, that there were so many things, because it's true. Lauren talked about it, supporting that decision-making. Said that if you know what decisions were made previously and why, you have that information, then you can more confidently make decisions going forward. And that doesn't have to be in alignment necessarily with the previous decisions, but you know why you're breaking that alignment with previous decisions. You know why you're changing the thought of where the organization's going. And then there's more efficient work processes, which I think is really tied to the employee experience. An organization taking responsibility for what it does, saying, this is what we do, and this is how we do it. So that way people can come in and start contributing instead of having to reinvent the wheel and try to make something up as they go along, building the ship while they're trying to sail it. And then improved agility. It's a lot easier to move from one system to another if you know what information you're storing and how you're using it. Not only the movement, it's a lot easier to identify what system you need because you know where the gaps are in the processes, you know what you need to do, and you know what you need to do going forward. That's my next one. Okay. How to invest in IM. I'm really going to keep it simple because this is like mindset, like taking it back. Nikki and Lori are really to get into the nuts and bolts of like the mechanics of how to invest in IMs, but I want to go to the thought before it of how you start doing it. Because this is long-term internal work that has to be done. So the first thing is to use consultants wisely. I've seen a lot of people think of information management or records management as a project. It's just something you have to do. You got to clean out the filing cabinets or clean up your network drive or whatever it is. It's just something you do once. But it's not. It's a lot of work. It's really about building a culture of stewarding information. So instead of thinking about, and consultants are highly useful, particularly when you're starting out, you've never had an information management program before, kind of like if you've never had a puppy before, you might get yourself a puppy trainer, right? Like you have the puppy in the household, you go to somebody in the household is then being the contact with the puppy trainer, figuring out what are the commands we're using, what's our feeding schedule, what's our walking schedule, and then brings that information back to the household, and then coordinates that within the household. All right, who's taking the morning walk, who's doing the evening walk, who's doing everything in between, and so that there's somebody who has accountability and then is holding other people accountable within the organization and understands, well, not the organization, we're still in the household, it understands what else is happening in the house, right? Like, and balancing the needs of the puppy with what the household needs. So it's the same thing with the organization. The cute little puppy is your information and you want to take care of it. And so the consultant can help you to devise strategies on how to do that, but the household has to take on that responsibility and then work it into how that household is operating. So it's not so much that you want to invest in someone to do the work, it's that you want to make it a part of the work. Because part of the job is producing the evidence of the job. So you want to people don't need another thing to do. So it just needs to be part of how we do it. Okay, I'm gonna go back, no, where does it stay here? No, we'll stay here. The next thing is to make it yours. This kind of goes along with what I was just saying, is that we need to make it a part of the culture of the organization so that it's just not at the end of something, it's right there at the beginning with everything. I'm gonna go back to the kitchen for a second. You go to somebody's house and they say, go ahead, get yourself a drink, make yourself at home. So you walk in and you open a cupboard where you think the cups will be. They're not there because that's where they keep spices. And then you go into the refrigerator thinking you're going to get soda, purple stuff, Sunny Delight, and there is bottled water and like kombucha there. And you're like, okay, this isn't my setup. And you kind of have to adjust. So you want to make it all specific to your organization. And there are like infinite ways to do that. And really thinking about not being precious about the names of things. I can talk about an experience I had in an organization. I started, the office I worked for was rather unimaginatively called the Information Resources Office. I wasn't even sure what that meant. I was like, all right, sure, I'll leave this. So we changed it to archives and records management to make it a little bit more clear, but I don't know, it's not inspiring to people, and people have their concept of what archives are, they feel warm and fuzzy about it, but it's the past, it's not them. And then, records management, I don't know, people usually feel scared, like they're gonna get in trouble for something, so it wasn't really helpful. Then the organization came up with their strategic vision and their strategic goals. And hey, knowledge and legacy showed up in there. So we renamed the office to the Office of Knowledge and Legacy, because I don't know, who does that better, archives and records? So that gave us a lot of credibility in the organization. It was clear. It wasn't something separate from the work. We were part of the work that the organization was doing. There it is. That was good. Okay. Maybe we'll have another wave. Well, they have our attention. I feel like I'm on the Gong Show. So anyway, so we renamed the office, which then also meant renaming other things. Like, I had been asking for a reference archivist for years. No, you can't have a reference archivist. Well, we're the Knowledge and Legacy, Office of Knowledge and Legacy. I need a knowledge navigator. Same job description, just a little, adjusting the language. Yeah, yep, you need a knowledge navigator. And that was added into the budget. So it's like, thinking about what works for the organization and your program, making that balance and putting that out there. So with that, and because that also tells me that I'm on time, that I need to transition off question one, I'll open it up to Nikki and Lori and ask you, what's the most important thing that an organization can invest in when it comes to information management?
I've used this phrase before, but I would say baking information management into the DNA of your organization and making it everyone's responsibility. It's not simple, but it is simple because you can't do this alone. The organization has to support it and has to do it holistically.
And I think what I would say is sort of a corollary to that is that the biggest lesson I've learned over the last 5 years working with foundations is there needs to be a core person in the organization who conceptualizes the work, who builds the work out across the foundation, someone who can devote a significant amount of time and thinking and advocating for information management.
Awesome. I think I'll turn it over to you, Lori. Let's go to question 2.
So you want to do this one right now? No. Okay, we're moving on. That happened faster than I expected. So there's a good chance your foundation is already managing information in localized ways, if not more broadly. So I want to go back to Bonnie's kitchen analogy, which I love. Think about the different kinds of information that flows through your organization as different kinds of vegetables. Each product has specific needs when it comes to storage and use. So root vegetables, store in a cool, dark space, they keep for a really long time. Fresh tomatoes should be kept at room temperature. I just learned that. Room temperature, folks, for best flavor and eaten within about a week. And lettuce likes to be refrigerated, maybe in a crisper drawer, and used within a relatively short window of time. Similarly, different types of information your foundation creates and manages will be stored in systems that are suited to the life cycle of that information. So, the next question I have for you, do you know what kinds of information your organization creates and where it's stored? We had Roland up here, grants management. They are the top chefs when it comes to information management in many foundations. They probably have procedures and policies for how information goes into the GMS, how it's managed once it's there, and training for staff and users about how to input information, how to get information out when they need it. Taking a page from the grants management recipe, can the same be said for other kinds of information systems, such as board management software? Several organizations I work with use Diligent. Document management, storage, SharePoint, Dropbox, everybody has an enterprise system that they're using. Financial management software. There are many different tools that the finance team is using, from payroll to expenses, many more, I'm sure. And then email providers like Outlook or Google. And I know I've forgotten some. So anybody, other systems that you're using that I haven't mentioned already?
I'm going to say intranet.
Intranet, absolutely. Intranet and the website. Yep,
How about an HR information system?
absolutely. And then there are the messaging and collaboration platforms like Slack. So these are all different examples of where information might be living in your organization. And by cataloging these systems, you can build a picture of your organization, how it manages information across the organization. So, are we on the next slide already? I can't really see. Who in your organization manages the information in these systems? We talked about grants management, our top chefs. But what about the other systems? And maybe what policies and procedures are in place to govern those systems? So IT probably manages email and cloud storage. Finance manages payroll. Maybe the president's office manages board documents. So let's peel back another layer. Do you have informal working groups that meet to discuss and manage this kind of information? If not, can you build one? Looking at the systems where information lives in your foundation and collecting the people and policies that manage them into a working group, you're in a great position to start to formalize an information management plan. So what might that plan include? So once you've mapped all this information and who sort of owns it, you can start to formalize that into a policy that distributes roles and responsibilities. Then a retention schedule that would lay out how the different kinds of information should be governed. Documenting how long records are kept can manage and can help you manage your organization's risk, both when it comes to legal disclosure and data privacy. And then a strategy for training staff about how to manage the information they create. Everyone needs to understand, as we said earlier, that it's their job to manage information. And training sessions are not just a one and done conversation. They're hallway conversations. They're resources that you can put in on your information system database so that people can access it asynchronously when they have a question. So next, I'd like to introduce Therese Coudreau, who's the Vice President for Administration and the Board Secretary at the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation in Miami. Therese has information governance as one of her key roles, and she's going to talk to you about how their internal information management team has morphed over the years. Whoop. She's going to work it back there. Help from the back.
Not planned. But I love that catch, yes.
This is
If not-
recording or being streamed?
It's a
It's a
recording,
recording.
yeah. So actually, I mean, I could read it, but you won't have Teresa's voice, which is nice. All right.
I can summarize. Okay, so the Knight Foundation has a physical archive that they started back in the 90s, and it's a paper archive for the most part. And they had the same archivist working on this as a consultant for many years, but she was focused on paper only, and so that lasted about 20 years. She left, she retired, and then there was a gap, that gap. And in the interim, they built what they called an archive concierge team with staff in different departments that would sort of be the knowledge, the key person in each department who had information to help the department understand what records should be archived. They were sort of the interpreters of the retention schedule. That has morphed again because we really wanted people to take ownership of this team of archive concierge, because this team needed to reflect the organizational culture. Knight Foundation is in Miami. There's a lot of the Latin culture built into the organization now. So they took on a new name, Legacy, Information Governance, and Archives, which abbreviates to La Liga. And they really felt empowered with this new name. So they are working constantly on information governance. This is an ongoing process, but it's really started to work for them. It builds trust across those different departments to have someone who's one of them, teaching them how to call out important information that they're building in their team, where to put it, why it's important to archive it. She would have said it much better than I can, but that's sort of it in a nutshell. So I want to open it up to the panel to discuss, where have you seen opportunities to turn incidental information management that might be happening sort of under the radar into an intentional information management plan?
I can start with that. Office moves. Office moves are a great time to get people on board with your information management, because they're cleaning out and they don't want to have to deal with it. It's a lot. I don't know, moves are traumatic. So it can really help them through that. And then, it happens when you move into a new space. It's like, I never want to go through that again. So you can really help by starting the seeds of some good records management mantras for them. One that I gave to someone is, it's someone's responsibility, but not mine. So to get rid of things that a lot of information is passed through that's given to you FYI, but it's not your responsibility to hold on to it, right? That's the job of whoever created it. So really giving them some things that they can do best practices going forward.
Nikki?
So years ago, when I worked at the Ford Foundation, my team managed a physical library. And there were thousands of items, like bound reports and books on subjects that were related to our programs, travel resources, foundation publications, you name it. And trained librarians carefully cataloged and managed those materials using a traditional library management system. And in that system, we created a foundation-specific classification scheme that was kind of loosely based on the LC scheme. At the time, our grants management system didn't facilitate the same level of classification, and we always used to get a lot of questions on the types of grants that we make. How many grants have we made on subject XYZ? And our GMS wouldn't support that kind of query, so we MacGyvered the system into classifying, to help us classify grant records outside of the grants management system. So our work did a couple of things. It demonstrated the value of classifying grants by subject and influenced the development of the successor grants management system. And the classification scheme that we used was an early iteration of what became the Foundation's enterprise taxonomy, and helped people really understand what that was all about.
Thank you. And I think it's over to you, Nikki.
Hi, everyone. I wish I was there with you. My name is Therese Coudreau. I'm the Vice President of Administration at the Jonathan James L. Knight Foundation. And among other things, I'm responsible for the Foundation's archive. I'm here to tell you a little bit about our embedded team of archive experts. But first, a little context. Knight's archive is about 25 years old, and we've never had a staffer who's a professional archivist. It's a contracted position, and for the first 19 years, we had the good fortune of the commitment of one archivist that worked with us. And during that time, we also had an internal staffer who liaised between staff and that archivist that was contracted. And that archivist always believed that archive records must be paper-based. And about 6 years ago, she retired, and we repurposed the staff position and really changed things up. And that's when we created the Archive Concierge, that internal team. It's a small cross-functional team of Foundation staff who are being taught to be experts and super users of information governance and the archive. We identified them by focusing on people who were sort of naturally interested in this kind of work and people who we thought had some good influence skills, because it's needed to influence people, to practice good information governance. We figured out the math, and it's about 40 hours of their time over the course of a year. About 2% of their time is really needed to help us do this important work. Recently, we rebranded the Archive Concierge to the LIGA, L-I-G-A, for Legacy, Information Governance, and Archive. And it really resonated well with this team of people. We think partly because we're in Miami and have strong roots in the Hispanic culture, and La Liga in Spanish means the league in English. Their job is to drum up enthusiasm and influence people to help them do their best work. They sort of work with their immediate teams before we have a records blitz to really drum up enthusiasm and help their team members really focus in on what happened over the course of the year and what needs to be preserved. They liaise with the contract archivist and me, and together we get answers to everybody's questions, and then they give us feedback, for constantly improving how we approach this important work. So does it work? It's a work in progress, to be honest. When we began working with Lori Eaton in 2000, we really updated our thinking on digital records. And because they are so ubiquitous, we realized everyone, not just the Liga, really needs to up their game in information governance. So more recently, over the past 2 years, I've updated job descriptions and performance expectations to make sure that it's really embedded in how we think about the information we create. It's working well, and we have a long way to go. These kinds of testimonies can sound like, Knight Foundation's got their act together and they're doing it perfectly. We're not. It's a journey. And I would say that my never-ending goal for Knight, if I were to leave my legacy, it's that records management isn't something people do in service to an archive. Records management is something people do in order to do their today better, smarter, faster work and preserve their work product for history. And that's us. I hope I get to see you all next year.
I told you she could do it better than I could. So with that, Nikki, over to you.
That was beautiful. So when is the right time to build your case for formalizing your IM practice? Now. Now is the right time. And as an information professional, whether you're a records manager, an archivist, a knowledge manager, you should always be building your case for formalizing your IM practice. And by formalizing, I mean building a practice that's at a minimum supported by policy, reinforced by staff training, and is supported by one or more staff. It's super important. So first of all, I want to say it's safe to assume that all of your organizations, to some extent, believe that managing information is important because you're here and you're working in that capacity. So that's great. Now I'm going to repeat what you've heard others say a couple of times already this morning, and that is making the case for formalizing or growing or enhancing your practice can take time and a ton of patience. It's not a one-time effort. The complexity and sophistication of the program is going to depend on your organization's culture, its values, its resources. What works in one organization won't work in another one. I think all of those things bear repeating because I think those are fundamental. It's unfortunate sometimes. For me, I feel like it's a challenge of the type of work that we do that it is considered kind of a back office function in many organizations. And what I'm going to talk about a little bit today is hopefully providing some ideas and suggestions on how to get it out of the back office, how to begin talking about your work in a way that generates enthusiasm about the work and helps to educate. So I want to go back to Bonnie's kitchen analogy. And I know it might sound a little bit silly, and I tested this analogy out with my husband and my brother. And they both thought it was really helpful in trying to understand a little bit about what I do. Because when I start to talk about what I do, like Bonnie said earlier, I just get that glazed over look. It doesn't feel exciting to other people. So we can think of a formalized IM policy and procedures as an organizational recipe book that provides guidance on how to put all those good tools and ingredients and talent together to create dishes that are unique to your organization. So, good kitchen tools like your information systems, plus fresh ingredients, your information, plus top chefs, your grants managers, for example, equal easy to find artifacts of your work, ability to learn from past decisions, and efficiency and improved operations in your organization. So this leads to my first question. How do you build a strong case? There's no magic bean here. IM practice rarely evolves in a linear way. Oftentimes it's opportunistic, and that's okay. That's all good. Your strategy is going to depend on where your organization is in its IM maturity. And I think Nettie said this earlier. You need to meet your organization, and that's leadership and staff, where they are, not where you are. That's very important to keep in mind. So my advice is to make it your top priority to do these 4 things. 1 is to understand your organization's values and priorities and risk management concerns, particularly around the creation and use of information. Then tie all of your activities and priorities to those values and priorities and concerns. That's very important. Learn how to talk about how they tie together. Then talk about your work in these terms at any and all possible moments. Always be advocating. Does everyone know Glengarry Glen Ross? Always be closing, always be advocating. That needs to become one of your top priorities and a skill that I recommend everyone in this field hone. And then lastly, seize big opportunities to demonstrate the value of your efforts and expertise. And we heard a little bit about big opportunities with office moves or with new programmatic strategies, anniversary events. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about each of these, break them down a little, and give you some questions to consider so that you can begin to develop your understanding of all of these things. So first, understand your organization's values around information. So for example, does it value knowledge and learning? Does it value transparency? Does your organization stand firm behind the theory of one source of truth? These are all things that you could use to communicate your message and to tie your work around. What level of awareness do staff have of their role in managing information? Are they trained? Is it ad hoc? Do they understand the value of their work product? I think in a lot of organizations, they don't understand just how important it is, not just for now, but for the future. And another question to ask or something to explore is, how do your manager and organizational leadership see your role? Have you ever asked them that question? I think it's what you hear back might be very eye-opening for you and give you some indication of how you might change your messaging and positioning. Next, something else we talked about, I won't spend a lot of time here, understanding your organization's priorities. So if business continuity is a top priority, and I think it was for a lot of organizations just after COVID, make that your top priority and make supporting that initiative your top priority with the work that you do. Understanding your organization's culture, we talked a lot about this earlier as well, but lots of organizations are different. Some organizations focus on teamwork. Others celebrate individual contributions. Some have divisions that work with their own work processes, and then other organizations have a universal work process for everybody. Most organizations I know of have ghost processes. They're usually an open secret, but oftentimes they're covert. But knowing about those will help you understand what you need to harness and how you need to rally people behind the work that you're doing. The next item I wanted to talk about was gauging your organization's tolerance for risk. There are some organizations that have zero tolerance for risk, and I'm talking about those organizations that have like a 3-month retention policy on email. And then you have other organizations where you keep your email forever, and we have decades worth of email that is untapped and potentially a giant risk for your organization. This next one is very important, and it involves finding and developing champions. I mean, I know you're all champions for your work, and it's not always enough. Which is a shame, because I think we're the best champions. But this champion does not have to be the person you report to. Always keep that in mind. It should be a senior leader who has influence to open doors and can talk about your work in circles that you don't necessarily have access to. This is very important. This person understands the value of good IM because he or she has already benefited from it. So I think you get where I'm going here. Once you've had a successful interaction in supporting somebody in your organization, and you know they were really happy with what they were able to accomplish because of the work you did for them, they are a potential champion, a potential very strong champion. Not only can they talk about the work in ways that resonate with their peers, if they're a leader, they can be a good model for strong information practices with their own staff. That is super important. I think that there are many, many different ways you can get a champion. I think what I just said is really important. By making an impression on somebody and taking advantage of that opportunity to elevate that piece of work, I think that's a really important way of getting a champion. So I'm going to move on to be an information management evangelist. I think we are, in this room, I feel the love and I feel the energy, and I love not having to explain what I do to anybody here. But we all have to learn to talk about what we do and do that really well. Always describe your work with excitement and enthusiasm. Talk about how you can support your colleagues in ways that resonate with them specifically. And again, I think many of us are really good at that. Working in foundations, we know how to talk to our program staff. We know how to support, we know how to talk to our IT teams. We know less, I think, about how to talk to our executives and to get space and time to talk with them. I think that this is a very important thing for us to work on. One thing to remember is that your goal shouldn't necessarily be to inform when you pitch, but you should look at it as an opportunity to engage and have them ask questions, leave them wanting more, leave them in a position where they will come back to you and ask for your assistance. I think that's one very important key to success. tie your messages to organizational activities and successes and failures, things that are on top of mind for executive leadership and staff. So if you've just, as an organization, had an enormous challenge, say, with the media, make that your focus. Make supporting that your focus, or make that cautionary tale of not being prepared for that one method you use to describe why it's important for you to do what you do. The next one I love, and it feels a little underhanded, but I think it's really important. Appeal to your audience's desires and fears. I've appealed to the ego of my colleagues before, and it works. And I think it's really important for us to do that. For example, in foundations, many program staff have a desire to leave a strong footprint, to leave a strong legacy, to be innovative, to preserve, their mark on the foundation. And you want to underscore that. You want them to know that that's what you support. When you're talking to lawyers, some of their greatest fears are litigation, and this is another way to position the work that you do. It's not necessarily the sexiest way, but avoiding risk by not having documents and information that you shouldn't have is a really, really compelling way to describe the importance of your work. And then lastly, I've got two more. Always be prepared. And this means unplanned moments, which can have an enormous impact. So just imagine you get onto the elevator, you're with the foundation president. The president just talked about this new initiative that is developed or is being developed. And you're able to say, I read a memo from 1975 where a program officer had talked about the idea of developing something very similar. So it looks like the seeds of the work that we're doing now were planted back in 1975. How about if I send you that memo so you can have a look at it? It's a great opportunity to connect and to be relevant and on point and to be top of mind. And then lastly, this is my lastly. Seize big opportunities to demonstrate how critical this work is to your organization. So I've had talks, a couple of talks in the past year where I talk about big opportunities. And I'm going to go through some of them now. One, these are powerful moments to extend and amplify your work. And these include instigating events, which we heard about in our first session. So things like physical office moves and 50th anniversaries, where the organization needs to look back and understand where they've been, and they're hopefully going to come to you, or you're going to come to them and offer them the deep knowledge that you have access to. Programmatic initiatives like strategic shifts, I think, are also incredible opportunities. Disasters and crises, which we've already talked about a little bit. We talked about COVID, we talked about national disasters, but in organizations, for example, that have work around the world, sometimes there's regional instability and upheaval that is top of mind for the organization. Sometimes there's negative press and media scrutiny that executives are scrambling to respond to. And then, unfortunately, sometimes there's litigation. And when there's litigation, I think the records management team and the archivists are of enormous support. And the last powerful moment or opportunity that I have here is departures of key staff members. And I think we've talked a little bit about this as well when it comes to business continuity. When people who have been with the organization for a long time leave the organization, they leave not just with information, but they embody that information in experience. And there are ways, without cloning somebody and capturing their brain somehow, there are ways that involve conversations and inquiry where an organization can learn from the departing staff member. So next, I'd like you to have a listen to my friend, Donita Folkvane, who might be sitting next to you in this room. Hi, Donita, I see you. Who took advantage of one of these big opportunities when she worked for Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors, where she advocated for a protocol that was developed by a consultant that she worked with that helped to capture historical knowledge when a VP, a long-tenured VP, was leaving the organization. One thing to note when she's describing this process is how it involves the participation across the organization. And I think that's important because it helps deepen the appreciation for and a commitment to the process when many people are involved. So with that.
Hello, everyone. This is Donita Folkvane from Philanthropy New York. I'm giving you a very brief overview of the knowledge transfer process created by John Hovel and partner at Stratactical. For your first step, you'd want to establish the team. Find the person who's in danger of leaving your organization, and then find 2 professionals and 2 aspirationals who would complete the team. The second step is to create the retention plan. That's basically coming up with all of the questions that the 4 not expert people would have for the expert that can't be answered by a 30-second conversation or an email or a handbook. Things like, how do you bring bad news to your organization, to your board and to your organization? Or who and what and why are the 5 most influential relationships in your career? How did you come about them? Why did you establish them, etc.? The third step would be to capture the knowledge and share it, which is taking notes and taking recordings, maybe doing a word cloud. And the final step is for everyone on the team to have a chance to practice and innovate all of the questions that were just answered. If you'd like to learn more about this subject, this process, please come to this afternoon session, The More You Know, when information becomes knowledge. Thank you.
Let's go live.
Would it be possible to just to pull up the whole slide business? Because then I can just talk about it. I was given a minute to do this, so let's see if I can do it. I think I did it in a minute and 30 seconds, maybe. Yeah. So the first step is to find the person that's potentially leaving your organization, and then find 2 people who are called professionals who are maybe 5 to 10 years away from that same position. Then you find 2 others who are aspirationals, who are like 10 to 15, 15 to 20 years from that position. You gather them together, create a team, and then you send the expert out of the room, and then you ask the 4 people at the table. There's got to be a better name for it, but it's used the trigger method, to write down all of the questions that they could possibly think of that they want to ask that person that can't be answered in 30 seconds and can't be answered by a handbook or anything else. And then you go around the table and read 1 question each. And that's why it's called the trigger method, because it triggers other people to go like, oh my God, I didn't even think about that. Let me write some more. And then you show those questions to the expert. That expert then adds questions, and then you bring them back into the room. Make sure that they are all aware that like hierarchy is now out the window. And as a team, you start then to identify areas where you can, you start prioritizing the questions. And you talk about which ones are duplicative, et cetera. You usually get about 120 questions altogether that are then brought down to 40. And then you just answer all of those questions. The important part then comes next. Because there's no more hierarchy, you ask the rest of the team, how can we innovate this? And is there anything what are your practices? And then everybody gets to practice. So those questions could be something like, how do you give bad news to a board? That's such an important question, right? Or who are the 5 most formative people in your career? How did you find them? Why did you have them? And then if the question is, how do you give bad news to a board? how do you innovate that? How do you practice that? And then you put them in a situation where they can practice giving bad news to the board. And you learn from each other. The indirect costs are, you save about $191,000 per team. The end. And I'll talk more about it at the later session.
Thank you so much, Donita. We owe you, big time. So I want to end by asking a question of the panel. How have you seized opportunities to demonstrate the value of IM in your organizations?
So I'll just tell you a quick story. I was at one of the foundations I work with and happened upon a hallway conversation about artificial intelligence and how the organization was talking about developing an internal resource. So I was able to ask them, how would they find and identify the internal information they would use to feed that internal large language model to create that AI resource internally? And that really got the team thinking about where their information is stored, what would be the reliable, useful information to feed the large language model. And it was really brought the old archive, we don't need that stuff, it's old, idea up into the forefront of an active project.
And for me, there was a new president starting, and 100 days before he started, he gave out his email address and said, please let me know everything I need to know. Well, stretched out the typing fingers and said, dear sir, thank you for this opportunity, and let him know everything he needed to know. So here's the founding principle of the organization. Here's what were the main strengths of the presidency as they have come, immediately after and through the organization's history. Figured, I got a response, thank you very much. I was, all right, that's that. And then come to the first day, his first day as president, and within the first 5 minutes he had an all staff at 9 a.m. That we were all there for, and in the first 5 minutes, Bonnie in archives gave me, and it's like, whoa, it's that immediate visibility to the organization. Somebody at that level, I had been, as you said, I've been a champion, jumping down and preaching archives, but to have the president come in his first 5 minutes, put it out there and start talking about it as part of what he's thinking about in building the strategic vision for the organization. So great success. But I should preface that and add on to that a little footnote that you kind of have to embody the Winston Churchill that success is going from failure to failure without any loss of enthusiasm, because there were 2 presidents before where I did the same thing. Great, you're president. Here's everything you need to know. Interested. Oh, that's nice. Good to know. But not, using it in the way that you would want to. So, yeah. Oh, wait, I think, is that it? That's it? Wait, okay. So, summary, did we do it? Did we do everything we said we were going to do? We talked about the benefits of IM, and, hopefully have a good, that big, broad perspective to how to bring it into your organization, talking about, one of those mechanisms of looking at your internal work, seeing what's already happening and bringing it into the suite of what, talking about it as this program of services. And then, all the things we've been saying that you guys have already exemplified as well, just seizing every opportunity to expand and amplify, really get out there and have your message be heard. Speaking of being heard, we want to hear any questions. Andrew, you said it was okay to go a couple minutes over?
Yeah, I think because we have some wiggle room up later, but lunch is going to be out soon, so we'll take just a couple of minutes, a few questions, and then we can announce lunch.
Yes.
So just to build off the kitchen metaphor, I think the one element you left out is the diner, the person who's eating from the kitchen. And I would go back to your first slide where you were listing the really important aspects of IM, and I would add accountability. So that's where the diner is actually tasting what you've produced. So I think it's really important that all accountability rises from what's preserved through information management. So at the first level, anybody who's going to do program monitoring and evaluation is going to be working with materials that you have. But it goes up to the board of the foundation. When the board says, did this project work? Did this program work? Are we having impact? All of that in a foundation environment is based on what's performance in those records. And then fundamentally, in a democracy, the only thing that holds philanthropy accountable is how it is transparent to the larger public. And the public is going to hold foundations accountable based on performance, based on those records. And I think it's really important that people include accountability as one of those really key issues.
Absolutely agree. Thank you for that addition in there. As I said, I had to rein myself in on that slide, but maybe we should make it 6.
I will be quick. There must be something in the air because I've been thinking about cooking a lot as a metaphor for what we do. I think I am the worst nightmare of many people in this room. I'm a cook rather than a baker. And so for bakers, I made a lasagna once. My sister wrote it down, like step by step. And the next time I made it, she's like, where are the leeks? I'm like, what are the leeks? I don't care, right? She's like, you put the leeks in the last time. I was like, oh, that's nice of me. But I didn't remember it. It was not something that I wanted to put down, but she did. So how do you handle the cooks? And how do you handle when people don't have access to the same level of kitchen that you do?
I started this kitchen thing, so. Yeah, so that's a great question. I mean, it really is, like what's talked about is like starting where you are. And, I gave that mantra before of like, it's someone else's responsibility, but it's not yours. But there is where we overlap with each other, right? So like, yeah, you're doing the cooking, but somebody's gonna have a different perspective that's captured in what they're doing. So I feel like, I think this is where people get a little overwhelmed when it comes to like, the legacy and information management is like that it's somehow all their responsibility, but there's so many different, in an organization, there's so many different ways that it's coming together that I feel like all the pieces wind in so that somebody else can remember the leaks, and puts that on there. But it also does make me, when I say documentation is very important, So, I mean, I learned this, even throwing parties, again, cooking, my sister-in-law is after me for this coleslaw recipe I made 7 years ago for a party. I didn't document that I made that coleslaw recipe for the party. I'm like, I never made coleslaw. She's like, yes, you did. So now I know, personally at home, look, it's all bleeding into my life. I document my recipes for every party that I throw now because I don't want that to happen again. But in the workplace, documenting that was a decision to throw leeks in. Threw leeks in once, it worked, just as like a little addendum to that recipe. But I think that's kind of it. Sorry, go.
And I would say that I think, to your point, this work requires creativity and flexibility. So you can't just say, these are the records that everybody in the organization needs to collect because they may not create those kinds of records. They may have some very unique records based on the work that they do. So I think having, like Therese talked about, La Liga, where there's someone embedded in each group, each program area, each department, that can really tailor the kinds of information they're collecting so that it makes sense for that group. And I think that's how you build trust and accountability for that group to feel confident that what they're giving the archive or saving or not saving in terms of the information systems, confidence that they're doing it in a way that makes sense for them.
So we're going to do the last question right over there, and then we can wrap it up.
Okay, thank you. I realize I'm between everybody and lunch, so I'll try to keep this quick. And really, the durability of an approachable analogy, wow, it really got a lot of resonance, and that's great. So Bonnie, you had mentioned the rebranding that you had done, and I think Knowledge Navigator is a really cool title, and it seems like it really worked well in your case, and with Lodico, which came up as well as a rebranding. So just kind of curious, it's something that I also have done in my career as well. So maybe just to hear a bit about like lessons learned in that process, or now that you've gone through it, is there a wrong time to do it? Just be really interesting to kind of hear a bit more about considerations for rebranding as a way to have more more of a shared ownership for archives and with employees as well as across the enterprise.
I can say from the Lodico perspective that came about through two avenues. One was a survey post a records, what we call a records blitz, just to see how things worked, how did the training go, what kinds of questions did people have. And then the concierge team got back together and they said, you know, we need to embrace this more. Look at the feedback we got. So it was sort of a twofold. It was the survey, and then it was coming back together and looking at the results and talking about what they wanted to be and letting them own that group.
And I would think it kind of has to be organic. Like forcing, like you could have a rebrand, but forcing it is not going to be helpful. It's not going to take. It worked in that moment because it was clear, you know. But I think, you know, you can try, you know, you test it. If it doesn't take, then, you know, kind of back off it and wait for an organic moment for things to happen. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'll leave it at that.
I'll just add very quickly before lunch. Sometimes the rebranding doesn't have to be a huge change. Sometimes a subtle change can be really effective. So, for example, my team was once called Information Services, which was very nondescript, very nebulous. We changed it to Information Management, not that much more specific, but one of the things we did was work with other organizations or other teams within the organization to make sure that our definitions, our practices, and our responsibilities complemented each other, and people were clear on who was doing what. So we weren't IT. And we worked with IT to make sure that they talked about IT and information management in the same way we talked about it. And that was, it was very helpful to us and to the organization. It gave them clarity.
Thank you, everyone.
I just want to say a quick note that some of these resources that we've talked about, especially a template for a retention schedule, will be on the archivingphilanthropy.org website so that you can access those later on.